Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something incredibly dense, deeply rebellious, and honestly, absolutely fascinating. We're unpacking a modern text known as the 15 Gnostic Pearls by Joseph Schettel. This bilingual framework is a bold, uncompromising plunge into neo-Gnosticism, and its whole purpose is to wake the reader up from what the author calls dogmatic sleep. Now, as we go through this, keep in mind that this text really does not hold back. It brings a fierce critique of organized religion and champions a wildly independent approach to spirituality. So let's jump right in and map out this radical journey together.
Right out of the gate, we're hit with this visceral question from Pearl 13. Do you ever feel like a literal hamster in a religious wheel? It's such a relatable image, right? The author argues that throughout history, people seeking out the absolute often get trapped in these closed circles of belief. You become that hamster, running endlessly, following all the holy instructions, debating the rigid interpretations, but you're not actually getting anywhere. And the text claims the system is basically designed for the amusement and control of the folks running the spiritual show from the inside.
And staying on that wheel, well, it comes with a massive cost. Pearl 3 tells us that every single human being carries this huge, unawakened potential for creativity and life. But while we're stuck in that spiritual sleep, our true creativity and capacity for unconditional love are tragically trapped. The text uses this haunting phrase, saying they look out sadly from a prison shell of potential. So the entire goal of these 15 pearls is to give you the sledgehammer needed to shatter that shell before your real life just drains away.
Section 1. Awakening from Dogma.
Okay, so how exactly do you break out? Pearl 7 maps out the seeker's evolution in 3 very specific stages. Stage 1 is the unconscious. This is total ignorance, where a person doesn't even have a concept of the divine. Then there's Stage 2, the sleepwalker. This is where organized religion steps in and sells the seeker a fake, finished image of God. They get totally obsessed with dogmas, holy books, and rules, completely confusing the heavy fog of rigid belief for actual truth. And finally, we have Stage 3, which is direct experience. This is the breakthrough. This is radical independence, where you finally escape that prison of inherited dogma. To really wrap your head around that final stage, just listen to this incredible confession from the text. I have no faith, no creed to profess. I am, after all, just a wind that blows only because it is driven forward by the breath of God. It's quite a statement, isn't it? The source material uses this imagery to highlight the stark contrast between that heavy, oppressive white fog of organized dogma and the absolute lightness of true spiritual freedom. The neo-Gnostic holds on to nothing, which means no earthly authority can take anything away from them.
Section 2. Understanding the imperfect world.
Now, to really grasp why this text demands such extreme independence, we have to look at its cosmology. Specifically, we need to talk about the demiurge. Pearl 12 explains that, completely unlike mainstream monotheistic religions, this text doesn't view the creator of the physical world as the ultimate perfect God. Instead, our universe was made by an imperfect craftsman, the demiurge. It's kind of like viewing our world as a rough draft. It's a work in progress, literally filled with conscious and unconscious errors, because the physical universe is just a flawed, unfinished imitation of a much higher, perfect reality.
But wait, the demiurge isn't the only force at play here. The text introduces us to an actively malicious entity called the spirit of imitation, or, get this, the hungry spirit of conscious confusion. This is that dark force recognized across all sorts of traditions. Satan in Christianity, Mara in Buddhism, Ahriman in Zoroastrianism. According to the Pearls, this spirit literally feeds on our dogmatic confusion. It wages this continuous, deceitful war not just against humanity, but against the demiurge itself, thriving wherever it finds blind obedience.
Section 3. The Trap of Authority. Because the world is seen as fundamentally flawed and full of deceit, the seeker is incredibly vulnerable. Pearl 2 warns that anyone who really thinks for themselves is basically caught between 2 modern extremes. On side A, you've got the forced unity of all opinions. That's the trap of strict orthodox dogma, where everybody is forced to think exactly the same way. But side B, that's equally dangerous. That's extreme diversity, where you're just drowning in endless, unanchored chaos, purely for the sake of being different. The text strongly urges the seeker to navigate a middle way, just to keep their reason and sanity intact.
So how do you walk that middle way without getting pulled off track? By keeping an eye out for spiritual manipulators. Pearls 10 and 11 actually give us a highly practical list of red flags for false authority. For instance, if a spiritual leader is pushing extreme urgency, making you feel like the world is going to end tomorrow unless you join them, that is a massive warning sign. If they use elevated, exclusionary language, act superior to you, or demand absolute submission without letting you ask critical questions, the author argues they are operating entirely on fear, not truth.
Which leads us straight into a core warning from Pearl 8. It borrows that famous biblical phrase we all know, "When the blind lead the blind, both fall into the pit." The text is absolutely adamant about this. Do not ever automatically hand over your authority to someone just because they claim to speak for a deity or happen to wear an impressive title. In the 21st century, the text insists, no one stands over you to tell you how to think. Your spiritual sovereignty is 100% your own responsibility.
Section 4. The Neo-Gnostic Path.
Once you reject those false authorities, you're finally ready to walk the path. But you can completely forget about the idea of finding a safe, comfortable harbor. Pearl 13 paints this incredibly vivid picture. The Neo-Gnostic path is like a stormy galley ship sailing out to totally unknown shores. It's not about finding a cozy little doctrine to settle down into for the rest of your life. It's an active, continuous, and sometimes brutal process. The text even notes that sometimes your ship is going to wreck entirely, and you'll have to rebuild your whole belief system from the floating debris. It takes immense resilience.
And that brings us to Pearl 1, which perfectly captures the exact mindset you need for this stormy voyage. There is no other way but to learn and be able to repeatedly discard all accumulated knowledge immediately, like old rubbish. You have to be ready to rigorously question absolutely everything. The second a new, profound truth reveals itself, a genuine seeker has to be brave enough to toss out their most deeply held beliefs if they don't serve the truth anymore.
And yes, this radical questioning even applies to the most sacred objects we have, holy texts. Pearls 9 and 12 state that all religious scriptures, whether it's the Bible or ancient Eastern texts, must be subjected to intense, impartial scientific criticism. The author says you have to strip away their holy untouchability. Now, the goal isn't to destroy these books, but to extract only the direct, meaningful knowledge. At the same time, you have to consciously have the courage to throw out the parts that just reflect human ignorance, hatred, or the influence of that deceitful spirit of imitation we talked about earlier.
Section 5. Love as the ultimate truth.
So if we strip away the dogma and we relentlessly question the holy texts, what is actually left? Pearl 15 pulls in this amazing, striking quote from the sci-fi author and Gnostic thinker Philip K. Dick, "Fish cannot bear arms." It's a wild image, but the source text uses it to argue a beautiful point. The true legacy of Jesus Christ, or really any genuine spiritual savior, cannot be carried forward using weapons, fear, or manipulation. The author posits that if any spiritual movement is armed with hatred, envy, or the desire to control people, it has completely and utterly lost its way.
Therefore, the ultimate metric, the only thing that actually matters, is unconditional love, not fear. Despite the relentless, heavy criticism of religious institutions woven all throughout the 15 Pearls, the author's final conclusion lands perfectly in step with the famous words of 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, love is kind, love does not demand its own way. If a belief system is running on fear, urgency, or control, it's a trap, plain and simple. Only unconditional love proves that a spiritual path is the real deal.
We see this deep, profound reverence perfectly captured in the text's chosen sign-off, which is actually drawn from the ancient Mandaean Gnostic tradition. In the name of the great life, let the sanctified light be glorified. This is such a brilliant example of the syncretic nature of Neo-Gnosticism. It deeply respects and borrows these beautiful, meaningful pieces from ancient traditions, but it repurposes them to build a totally new, independent path for the modern seeker.
Which leaves us with one final profound thought to close out our explainer today. I want you to look at your own life and the structures you've built around you. Do your beliefs operate through fear, urgency, and control? Or are they deeply rooted in unconditional love and the absolute freedom of radical questioning? The 15 Gnostic Pearls challenge us to shatter our own shells, question our most fundamental assumptions, and absolutely never settle for being a hamster in a wheel. Keep questioning, keep learning, and as always, thank you so much for exploring this with me.